So the key question is this: will these changes actually make veterinary care more affordable? And this is where the conversation becomes more nuanced, because while greater transparency is absolutely a good thing, and I do support that, just because a family can better understand the bill they're presented with is not the same as being able to afford it. Welcome to The Consult Room, the podcast where we explore the evolving world of modern pet care. I'm Dr Paul Manktelow, a UK veterinary surgeon with a deep passion for pet health and welfare. In each episode, I'll be exploring key issues, challenging perspectives, and offering expert insight and practical advice. Because ultimately, my mission is to improve the lives of pets and the people who love them. Today, I want to talk about the final reports from the Competition and Markets Authority, the CMA, into the UK veterinary sector. Now, this has been a long-running investigation and one that I've explored in previous episodes of the podcast, looking at some of the early findings and the wider debate around veterinary costs and access to care. Now that the final report has been published, we have a much clearer picture of what the CMA believes the problems are, and more importantly, what they think the solutions should be. Now, in this episode, I'm going to break down the key findings, explain what the proposed changes actually mean in practice, and share my own perspective as a vet working within the system, specifically in the charity sector, and whether these changes are likely to improve access to affordable care, which is my absolute passion and reason for being. As always, I'll take a balanced view because this is a very complex issue and there are valid points on all sides. So at its core, the CMA concluded that there are features of the veterinary market that are not working well for pet guardians. Now, one of the headline findings is around cost. Between 2016 and 2023, veterinary prices increased by around 63%, compared to inflation of roughly 32% over the same period. Now, the CMA estimates that this may have resulted in around £1 billion in additional costs to pet guardians over 5 years. Now, that's a really significant figure, and it's understandably where much of the public concern has come from. The report also highlights changes in the structure of the veterinary sector. Now, around 60% of practices are now owned by large corporate groups. Now, corporate ownership in itself isn't necessarily a problem. In many cases, it has brought investment, improved facilities, and access to more advanced treatments. But the CMA found that ownership structures are not always clear to pet guardians and that there is often limited transparency around pricing. Now, in practice, that means people may not know who owns their vet practice, how prices compare, or what their options are when making decisions about that care. One of the clearest areas of concern relates to medicines. The CMA found that pet guardians could save between 50 and 60% by buying medicines online rather than directly from veterinary practices. But awareness of this is low and there are barriers, whether that's communication, convenience, or the process of obtaining a prescription. One of the key changes here is the introduction of a cap on prescription writing. Now, this is currently suggested at £21 for the first medicine and around £12.50 for additional medicines. Now, on the surface, this is potentially a positive step. It should make it easier and more affordable for people, particularly those with pets on long-term or chronic medication. And they can access the medicines from alternative providers. But there are some really important practical considerations here. Online pharmacies are often able to offer lower prices because they buy in very large volumes and operate with different cost structures. Veterinary practices, on the other hand, have significant overheads associated with storing medicines, training staff, and ensuring safe dispensing and advice. There is also the time involved in generating written prescriptions, particularly where pets are on multiple medications, and that time has to be accounted for within already busy clinical environments. And while some practices have developed efficient systems, such as sending prescriptions electronically, this isn't universal. In many cases, it may still take longer for people to receive medication for their pets compared to getting it directly from their vet. And of course, medicines are only one part of the complete picture in terms of cost of care. So importantly, the CMA is not proposing to control prices directly. Instead, the focus is on improving transparency and helping people make more informed choices. Practices will be expected to provide clearer and more accessible information about their fees, including putting price lists online so that people can better understand costs before committing to treatment. There will also be greater clarity around ownership, particularly where practices are part of a larger corporate group, allowing clients to better understand who is providing their care. Now, for higher cost procedures, there will be an expectation of written estimates, improving communication around what treatment might involve and what it is likely to cost. Now, that's pitched, I think, at around anything over £500. Now, access to prescriptions should become easier, supported by the cap on fees, allowing guardians more flexibility in where they obtain medications. Now, there's also a focus on out-of-hours care. Now, many practices now outsource emergency services to third-party providers, but this isn't always clear to clients. The proposed changes aim to ensure that people are better informed about who is providing that care, how it works, and what the likely costs are, particularly in what are often urgent and stressful situations. And finally, improvements are proposed around complaints and the redress systems, making it easier for clients to raise concerns and understand how those concerns will be handled. Now, the report also touches on the wider veterinary workforce. Now, there is recognition that demand for veterinary care has increased significantly and that workforce capacity has not always kept pace. Now, veterinary nurses in particular are highlighted as a highly skilled part of the profession, which I wholeheartedly agree with, and they have the potential to take on an expanded role as regulation evolves. Now, from my perspective, this is an important point. We have a highly capable clinical team in veterinary practice, and making better use of that wider team could improve efficiency and potentially improve access to care. However, many of these changes sit outside of the CMA's direct control and depend on wider regulatory reform. And a consultation has actually just closed on the Veterinary Surgeons Act and the proposed changes to it. Another important point is that these changes won't happen overnight. The rollout is expected to take place over several years, beginning in 2026, later this year, and extending into 2027 and beyond. So any real impact on cost or accessibility is likely to be gradual. So the key question is this: will these changes actually make veterinary care more affordable? And this is where the conversation becomes more nuanced, because while greater transparency is absolutely a good thing, and I do support that, just because a family can better understand the bill they're presented with is not the same as being able to afford it. And that distinction really matters. The CMA's approach is based on the idea that by improving transparency and increasing competition, pet guardians will be able to make better choices, and that this will ultimately lead to better value. But for me, that feels more like an assumption than a guarantee, because veterinary medicine has advanced hugely over the past couple of decades. We now have access to more diagnostics, more treatment options, and more complex procedures than ever before. But all of that comes at a cost. At the same time, we're seeing increasing demand, workforce pressures, and rising expectations from pet owners. Now, while these measures may improve how decisions are made, they don't necessarily address the underlying drivers of cost. There is also the question of unintended consequences. Now, many practices rely to some extent on income from medicines to support the overall sustainability of the business. Now, if that income is reduced, for example, through increased use of online pharmacies, it may need to be recovered elsewhere. And the most important point of interaction in veterinary care is the consultation. So there is a possibility that costs could shift rather than reduce, with increases in areas like consultations or procedures. Now, that's not inevitable, but it is a realistic consideration. It's also important to recognise that veterinary pricing is often more complex than it appears. Practices may apply margins in some areas, but they also frequently subsidise others, sometimes offering services like routine procedures at very low cost or even at a loss. So when you change one part of that system, it can have knock-on effects elsewhere. And I think that brings us to a bigger question. Is this fundamentally a market problem, or is it a societal one? Now, from my perspective, working within a charity setting, I see every day the reality of people struggling to afford care for their pets. We're seeing increasing demand for financial support, greater reliance on pet food banks, and more difficult decisions around treatment, and in some cases, relinquishment of pets. So while these reforms may improve how the system functions, they may not fully address the underlying issue, which is affordability. Now, the CMA's final report is an important moment for the veterinary sector. It brings greater focus on transparency, communication, and consumer choice, all of which are positive steps. But it also highlights a deeper challenge, because improving information and competition is not the same as solving affordability. And that is the real issue many pet guardians are facing today. So while these changes may improve parts of the system, the key question remains: will they meaningfully improve access to care? And that's something we're only going to understand over time. Thank you for listening to this episode. You'll find all the relevant links to this conversation in the show notes. If you enjoyed it, please follow us and leave a review. It really helps other people discover the podcast. For more insights on topics like this, you can connect with me on social media at Dr Paul the Vet, or check out my website, theconsultroom.co.uk.